In this video, I'm going to demonstrate the process of producing some Dizzy pattern eggs. I begin the production of these eggs using one of the laminated boards that was described in part 1 of this video series. From this board, I cut 8 round discs on a jigsaw. I then took those discs and sliced them into 100,000 inch thick sections on the Accu-Slice system, as was demonstrated in part 2 of this video series. I did cut out the center sections of a number of these discs because I plan on using these center sections for both the top and bottom of the eggs in order to obtain the maximum use of the laminated board material. I begin the process by designing the egg shape using the Woodturner Pro software packages. I use the 3D Design Pro software package to design the outside and inside shape of the egg. I then transferred this data into the Woodturner Pro software package. The finished eggs will be 3.5 inches in diameter and almost 5 inches tall, and will contain between 45 and 50 disc layers. In the Woodturner Pro software package, I added these 50 disc layers, each layer being 100,000th of an inch thick. Then from this computer printout, I'm able to determine which of my thin discs, some solid, some with center holes, that I'll incorporate into the various layers of the eggs in order to obtain the maximum use of the laminate disc. From this single laminate board, I'll be able to produce 2 Dizzy eggs, and I had these eggs laid out on the table, going from the bottom of the egg with the solid disc, the middle disc having holes in them, and then the top of the disc again being solid disc. The various disc layers will now be glued up, and part of the glue up I'll be rotating each of these disc layers 5 degrees to produce my pattern, and then these will be stacked up and glued together to produce the finished eggs. The 2 eggs will be slightly different, however. In one of the eggs, I'll be rotating each of these discs 5 degrees the entire length of the egg. In the second egg, I plan on changing the direction of rotation to the opposite direction in the middle of the egg. Therefore, we'll get 2 different unique patterns for each of these 2 Dizzy eggs. In this video, I'm going to demonstrate the gluing up of these eggs, followed by turning on the lathe. So I'm ready now to begin the glue up of the eggs. Once again, I'll be using Type-On 2 glue to glue up the disc, and I'll also be using the same jigs that I used to produce the Dizzy bowls in part 2 of this video series. To produce these layered Dizzy eggs, I decided to rotate my disc 6 degrees between layers. So I used my alignment jig that I drew with SketchUp, and I put my center bar, which is a white bar, on the center axis, and then looking at my disc, 6 degrees is right in the center of the red bar here. So that'll be my indication going forward. So going forward, I'll just align these on top each time rotating a disc 6 degrees using that spacer bar. Okay, just to show a little bit closer how this is working. This white bar here is my center of my disc. And to get my 6 degrees of rotation, that white bar will be 2 red bars over on the next disc. In other words, that angle from here to here is 6 degrees. 6 degrees. Here likewise. So I'll just be counting over 2 red bars for my spacing as I go forward. Also, if I rotate this disc just 90 degrees, you can see my marks on here. These marks were created when I cut these disc slices off on the Accu-Slice system. So these are all the same side of the disc when it was cut on the Accu-Slice system. That makes sure things are as near perfect alignment as I can get. But that'll be my 6 degrees of rotation. Okay, now we're ready to start our glue up as we did in our previous video. Using this jig in my glue up. And as always, I always check the alignment of my lines. See if this foam brush might be a little bit faster and might get a smoother layer and less wasted glue. So I got my mark over here on this side. And I always try to start I'm rotating my disc clockwise. So I start with my center bar so it's not blocking the nails as I go forward. So I got it just to the left of this nail here. And as I described, I'm aligning that center white bar with the second red piece of wood. And I always check both sides. Sometimes moves a little bit after you put the clamps on. So you have to go back and readjust it. After gluing the first 2 layers, the discs are allowed to set and dry for at least 5 minutes. 3 additional layers are then added and glued into the glue-up jig in the same manner, rotating each layer the same 6 degrees and allowing the glue to set between each layer until a set of 5 disc layers is produced. The remaining discs are then glued up into sets of 5 layered discs in the same manner. I have my 10 sets of glued up discs, 5 discs per layer, all ready to glue up into the final egg. And after gluing these up, I did run these through my sander to get the edges clean of glue so I can see my edges. And I also sanded the surfaces lightly to make sure they're flat and get rid of all the glue marks. So these are ready to start assembling, starting with the bottom. So this is the bottom, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So I'll do the final glue up on this on the lathe. So we're ready to take these to the lathe and start the glue up. I have my pieces all set to glue up on the lathe. I'll be gluing it up like this, beginning with the bottom of the egg here and going to the top of the egg here. And sometimes I use a face plate to glue my pieces on, but this time I'm actually using a chuck with a piece of scrap wood in there, just a piece of cherries, uses my base. And then on my tailstock I have my rotating tailstock, and I have a chuck that'll be mounting my pieces in to glue up. So I'm starting with the base of the egg, and so it sticks out a little bit. I'm using a spacer in here. This is just to enable my piece to stick on here and not get glue all over my chuck. And so we're ready to start gluing up here. And I'll let that set for at least 10 minutes, and then I can glue up the second pieces. Okay, just release the pressure on the chuck. A little bit larger chuck now for these larger pieces. Once again, I have a spacer in here, And these are just scraps from other projects I'd use. They just happen to be the right thickness. Okay. This is the tricky part to get to the alignment correct. So once again, I got my center lines. My center lines on my pieces, and I have to line those up to just be off by 6 degrees. So I do a dry fit first, just to check it. Make sure I know how I'm going to go. Make sure everything lines up with my lines. And now I'm ready to put glue on that and start gluing it out. What's nice about this rotating tailstock, I can go and check the opposite side to make sure that both sides are the same. And that should be good. Again, let that set for another 10 minutes, and then I'll do the third layer. What I sometimes do between layers is I do run this just to make sure there's no glue and it stays flat. The remaining disc layers are glued on the lathe until all 10 disc layers have been attached. Be sure to allow each glued layer to set or dry before gluing the subsequent layer. For the final 2 disc layers, it also may be necessary to change back to the smaller chuck for the glue up. Well, my pieces are all glued up and they're dry and they're ready to start turning. I did add a rotating tailstock in just to give a little additional support as I take some of this meat off this large chunk of wood. And I will be using the cage once again because I'll be cutting in here and there are some hollow sections in the inside and I'm getting close to them. Okay, I just finished sanding this and it came out pretty nice. Okay, I moved my chuck that had the egg mounted in it, moved it to my rotating tailstock, and I installed my vacuum chuck on the head on the lathe. I make a little bit more noise when I turn the vacuum on. So my next step is to cut off the bottom of the egg, finish rounding it off, sand it, and finish it. Okay, just turn the vacuum off, and there's our finished egg. Let me give this a couple coats of some bush oil, and we'll see what it looks like. Now, I just gave this a coat of bush oil, brought out the color in all different woods, looks pretty nice. And I'm getting ready here to cut the second egg, which the difference is it'll change direction of rotation halfway down. through the egg. So we'll see what that looks like when it's done. The second set of discs was glued up into sets of 5 disc layers in the same manner. The only difference is that for half the disc, the direction of rotation of the disc layers was reversed. Here you can see the pattern change in the bottom and top halves of the egg due to this rotation change. Next, I'll finish the egg by gluing up and then turning it on the lathe. The glue of the disc layers was completed in the same manner as the previous egg. You can see the V-shaped pattern change in the middle of the glued up disc. So we can see this unique pattern of changing the rotation direction. We've got this sort of V-shaped throughout the piece. So let me sand this down and then I'll reverse it again in the vacuum chuck and cut it off. Okay, I took my egg off the headstock and remounted it on my rotating adapter for my tailstock, and I attached my vacuum chuck to my headstock, and so I'm now ready to attach this. Okay, I just shut my vacuum off. And there it is. You can see where the direction of rotation changed. It's quite unique. So once again, we get just a couple coats of bush oil and then polyurethane to finish it up. Okay, here are 2 finished eggs, and I gave these a couple coats of bush oil. I'll put a couple coats of polyurethane on it later. But we have our 2 styles here. This one here, all the layers rotated in the same direction. And you get this pattern. The second one here, I changed direction right in the middle of the egg. So I changed going from clockwise to counterclockwise rotation. And you get this different pattern. Exact same woods in both of these eggs, just different rotation patterns. Okay, I did learn a couple things in producing these 2 eggs. One, first of all, is the pattern. This was the pattern I used on this egg. And the problem with the alignment is there was no, I got 3 white bands here which are kind of very similar. Whereas this disc, on a previous egg, I have this nice yellow center band which is a little bit wider. This was much easier to align when I was doing the glue up. So I think the secret is to have a wide, contrasting, highly contrasting color band going in the middle of your disc. That way when you rotate it, you can easily line it up. Whereas this was, and they're very similar, and it was very hard to align this disc. The other thing I do is I think when I line these for gluing up, I develop some sort of system for marking the edge so I get the exact same rotation pattern each time. It's a little more difficult, especially when you're getting these small pieces. In fact, I think I'll refrain from using very small pieces, maybe nothing less than 2 inches in diameter, because this was getting very hard to align. So the bigger ones, even when I went from here to here, was much easier aligning these. then going from here to here. So there's 2 pointers that I came up with, is getting a nice center band that's contrasting color that stands out, and developing a system for marking it, for rotating it. That's the hardest part, is gluing it up. That's the most time-consuming part, is gluing all these individual layers and trying to get the exact same rotation for each layer. But those are the 2 unique patterns, which I'm quite happy with. And I'll be making some more of these.